So I want to ask you, who is your muse? Do you have a muse? We know the Greek origin of this term muse comes from the 9 muses, the goddesses, daughters of the Greek gods Zeus and Messamene, goddess of the arts and sciences. A muse, a creative influence, an inspiration, a stimulus, a person who calls forth the creative impulse for another. I think of famous muses across history. Edie Sedgwick, Andy Warhol's muse. Dora Maar, Picasso's muse, who inspired Guernica, among other famous works, who famously became Roman Catholic after her long affair with Picasso and was quoted as saying, "After Picasso, only God." I think I should also mention Teresa of Avila and so many 16th century female mystics for whom their muse was God, right? Mickalene Thomas, one of my absolute favorite contemporary artists. Visual artists, if you don't know her work, please look her up. Mickalene Thomas, her muse is her mother, former model Sandra Bush. There was Patty Boyd, the muse for both Eric Clapton and George Harrison. Apparently, there truly was a girl from Ipanema, a muse from Rio, who inspired João Gilberto to write his world-famous bossa nova tune. Patti Smith had Robert Mapplethorpe as her muse. And of course, the most famous muse of the modern era, Yoko Ono. As an artist, I have always had a muse. Not necessarily someone I knew personally, but someone whose work encouraged me in my own work. Someone who created art in the same spirit as I wanted to create. Someone who blazed a trail I hoped to walk in my way. Finding a muse is an ineffable experience. It's a connection that keeps you returning to that artist's work. A way they have with words or clothes or the air around them. A way they take up space that thrills you and makes you rethink your own approach to the world. I remember the first live concert I ever saw. And only now I realize, as I was writing this, did I realize its effect on my entire life and who I would become. I was only 8 years old when my parents took me to see Pete Seeger play a huge Catholic church in Chicago, and I dreamt about that church and that concert for years afterward. I can never forget the enormous mural of the Virgin Mary looming behind Pete's small figure with his banjo. The warmth in Pete Seeger's voice surrounded me, heartily singing a more just and loving world into being. I have always found Pete Seeger's voice paradoxical in its expression, both strong and humble, both kind and righteous at the same time. It was then I first realized the revolution would not be televised. The revolution would be sung. I listened to his records on repeat, his tapes on repeat, reliving what it felt like to be waist deep in the big muddy, to always, always sing of peace during wartime. Faith is like this, you see. See, right now, as the Amazon forest burns, as the ice caps melt, as the captives languish, we must sing the world of our dreams into being. There are times, like the time when 9 members of the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston were all murdered by a white supremacist terrorist. There are times when words fail, and even silence is not enough. So the only human response is to sing Amazing Grace. You remember that moment? Something about President Barack Obama's face as he broke into that old hymn. He looked so humbled by the weight and anguish of that moment. I watched that video recently this week. His expression seemed shy, sheepish even, as the notes poured out of him, a decent singing voice, but by no means perfect. Could you even imagine that kind of leadership now? That was a moment, a simple moment of lamentation translated from the Hebrew safad, to wail or to cry out. There was nothing else to do. And it was what we all needed. I have never protested without singing in a group. Sometimes with drums, sometimes with only our voices carrying each other across a bridge, up a hill towards a jail, a detention center, a nuclear weapons facility, a city hall. To express our anger with love that is revolutionary and righteous, we sing. To calm our nerves on the way to the protest, we sing. To reach out in the hopes our voices will carry our message beyond the threshold of where our bodies can go, we sing. Feeling love, we sing. If not for Sweet Honey in the Rock, I might not have married my partner, James. One of our first dates, that freshman year at Guilford College in 1997, was a Sweet Honey in the Rock concert in Dana Auditorium right on our campus. At that point, it had only been a few months of dating, and I knew how I felt and where I stood. I think he did too, but certain words had not been spoken. No one who attended, not one of my former classmates nor professors, has forgotten that night. It was a capital M moment. Bernice Johnson Reagan would tell stories. Heck, she would preach in between songs. And I remember her description of the way the air changes when a choir finds its harmony. The vibrations make the hairs on your arms stand up, she said. You forget you are a single person, an individual. You are now part of a whole. And this is where the choir was nodding vigorously. With that power, she said, there is a shift in the atmosphere. Changes the power. Sweet Honey in the Rock sang in that Quaker-style auditorium that night their only romantic love song. They didn't sing it often. It's called Sometimes. The chorus goes, I'm not going to sing it. The chorus goes, sometimes day breaks in my life. You are my sometimes. That was the night James and I proclaimed our love for one another, and we have not looked back since. I remember, too, being at Occupy Wall Street years later at Zuccotti Park in New York City the fall of 2011, and at Black Lives Matter protests in New York City in 2013. And I have to tell you, report from that time, overall there was very little singing. Lots of chanting, shouting, but not much singing. We need new protest songs, contemporary protest songs. We need new songs for the people today. Which brings me to one of my muses of 2019. I am proud to say I have found a muse in Lizzo. Yes. Not suitable for church. If you don't know, If you don't know her music, I would invite you to look up Lizzo's Tiny Desk concert on NPR from a few weeks ago. It was exhilarating to have her in the NPR studios. I mean, it was their most populated, the biggest audience they'd ever had there. You could see the whole staff had brought their children, too. It was a multi-generational experience. She said something in that concert that's been sitting with me. She said, "If you can love me, you can love yourself." See, Lizzo subverts the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, and she does it joyfully, with glee, celebrating her body and her selfhood with all the swagger of so many male hip-hop artists that have gone before. Her producing and her composing skills are some of the best anywhere. In fact, when I mentioned Lizzo, this concert, to James, he said, "Who, the flautist?" Because she is. She's a classical flautist, as well as a rapper and a hip-hop musician. But Lizzo's joyful pride in her black skin and her big body and her divine femininity are breathing life into me right now, and in so many others. Because these days when, as the psalmist says, on every side the wicked prowl, as vileness as exalted among humanity, these days we must lift our voices and sing our faith. When the words run out, when even silence can't hold all our fear, our worry, our joy, our love, we must sing our faith and sing though our voices shake. Seek your muse, someone whose art, whose expression in the world lights a fire under you, someone who shifts your atmosphere. I will close with a confession. I have another muse, a muse whose stories seep into my being and spark a fount of ideas, a muse whose choices, whose mistakes, whose hopes inspire me to create something new, something I've never been able to imagine before. My artistic muse, the singer of the songs of my heart, it's you. All of you. Amen.